Hello, Johan.
Hi there.
Mics are on.
Daniel was too long on.
We have an enormous challenge ahead of us if we are to curb emissions and take the planet into safe operating space. The good news is that with these challenges, there are also opportunities for corporations to explore the new emerging markets in this field. My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson. I'm one of the hosts here at We Don't Have Time, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session that we call Race to the Top. It's presented by the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. In this session, we'll have a panel to discuss the solutions at hand and also what is needed to implement these solutions in a larger scale. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce the CEO and co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, Johan Falk, who will set the scene for this session. So, Johan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's so great to be here. And the question, how can we create the exponential race to the top, phasing out the fossil economy by scaling up climate solutions? That's what we will talk about today. But first, who are we, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative? We bring together some of the leading disruptors and transformers in the economy with a common mission to halve emissions by 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions. And these are companies like Apple, Unilever, Stegra that we will have today. So both transformative companies as well as climate solutions companies. Now, the foundation of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative is the global carbon law, which you can see on the next slide. Yes, the global carbon law. That basically states that we would need to halve emissions by 2030 and every decade after that to achieve global net zero by 2050. And as we know, we're not on the right trajectory. We're still raising emissions. We're going in the wrong direction. So why is that? One reason for that is that in order to phase out the fossil economy, we need to scale up the climate solutions. And they are not scaling sufficiently fast. And they're also blocked by different types of policies. And that is why we can not just focus on the so-called down curves. We also need to focus on the up curves, how we're accelerating solutions, shifting out the fossil. And as you can see on these slides, normally solutions follow a so-called exponential trajectory, an S-curve. So they're perceived as going really slowly in the beginning and then passing a particular tipping point, which could be around 10-15%, where you come into self-sustaining feedback loops. That's very natural. And takes off and reach a cross point where it's basically phase out the old solution. We basically have two areas where we passed these tipping points. It's renewable energy, which is now the cheapest form of energy compared to fossil and other type of alternatives, and scaling very fast. And the second one is around electrical vehicles. Now, however, we see bumps in the curve due to particular slow permits and blocking policies, which tend to slow down the curves, unfortunately. But then we have a number of solutions which are really in an early stage, like what we will talk about today, like near zero steel, for example, regenerative agriculture, sustainable forestry, and so on. And all of these are on these expansion curves, and they might be perceived as going slowly, but it's absolutely essential to accelerate these solutions to phase out the fossil dominating solution. So our mission is, of course, to push these curves to the left, pushing the curves to the left. And how can that be achieved? I would mention three things. The first is the companies in the front line really accelerating the value chain transformation, transforming their value chains to shift out fossil, scale up the climate solutions. That is the first one. The second is that we really need to put pressure on policies that enable early solutions to scale much, much faster. We need massive investments in order to do that. But we also need policies which outbalance the relative price between the fossil solution versus the climate solution. The relative price is the key. And the fossil subsidies, of course, delay the complete transformation because it's all about the difference between the price of the climate solution versus the fossil solution. And thirdly, I am convinced that we need to move from a narrative of sharing of burdens to an opportunity narrative. Basically, where companies, value chains, regions, countries start to compete on winning the new clean economy, because we will basically, as you can see, shift out the complete economy. So if you're not part of that transformation, you will disappear as a company. It's also about showing that strong opportunity for countries in terms of wealth and growth. And that is what we would call the exponential race to the top. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Johan Falk, for setting the scene. And as you can see, we have more guests here joined for the panel. Sriram Rajagopal, you are head of climate and air pollution Inter IKEA Group. Wonderful to have you. And next to you on here is Fiona Duggan. You are a global sustainability senior manager at Unilever. And last but not least, Maria Persson Gulda, Chief Technology Officer at Stegra. So wonderful to have all of you here. And you've been in the back here listening to Johan, and of course you work with these topics all the time. So it's fantastic to have you here. So let's start in order for us to understand a bit about what we're really, the company's role in this. Let's go to Unilever and IKEA here. Most people, of course, are very familiar with your brands, what you do, but maybe just a sentence, if I start with you, Sriram, and also how you work with the major components of impact emissions here, reducing them.
Sure. IKEA is a global home furnishings company. We take a full integrated value chain approach. So it's from the extraction of materials to production, to transportation, to selling the products in our stores, customers using the product, and then ending up as waste. And we sort of want to have a circular economy around it. So we take a full integrated value chain approach. As of FY23, our value chain emissions were 24 million tons, so almost bigger than some of the countries like Lithuania, for example. Just to give you a quantum of the size, so we have big responsibilities. And in terms of the value chain, the biggest emission sits in materials and food ingredients, which constitute 50% of our emissions overall. And then we have customers' use of our products at their home when they plug it into their wall sockets, like dishwasher, ovens. And that constitutes around 15%. So both of these put together 65% of our emissions.
So it's a massive work that you're doing to reduce these emissions, of course. So Fiona, when it comes to Unilever, please tell the audience a bit about what you do and how also you address the value chain emissions curbing.
So Unilever has been around for about 100 years. Most of the people maybe watching might have our products in their house. 3.4 billion people use our products every day, which we're very proud about. And in March, we took the decision to look at how we can cut our emissions faster. And so we have a climate transition action plan that lays out exactly where we're going to cut our emissions. And we look to say, okay, well, where can we have the most impact and where can we have the data to track that as well? So we're looking at a couple of areas. So number one is scaling up our regen ag. Number two is making sure that we are using renewable energy in every case we can where possible. Number three, it's all about making sure that we are also maintaining our deforestation-free commodities. It's very important to us. And last but not least, we're also looking at the chemicals that we use as well in our detergents, in our home care. How can we make sure that they are fossil-free? So these are some of the things we're working on. Also, I should say, because I know it's a very big area for us as well, is scaling up our climate suppliers program. It's a very important area for us. And so those are those components that we said they're the ones we can really cut the emissions on.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Maria, Stegra is a major company too, of course, but maybe not as well known as Unilever and IKEA. So could you please tell us a bit about what you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. We have only existed for 3 years, started really 4 years ago, and we started at H2 Green Steel and recently just changed name to Stegra. We are setting up a green steel plant that will produce green steel at scale, 2.5 million tons by 2026. Up in the north of Sweden, we will abate 95% of the CO2 that exists in the production of steelmaking. And this is really important because steel is 8% of the global CO2. So, and we do this with our customers, but also our technical suppliers and other investors jointly together in partnership in order to get it in place.
And as far as I know, your order books are full already. Is that correct still?
We have sold more than 50% of what we produce, yes.
That's pretty impressive. Well, thank you, Maria. So back to you, when it comes to your value chains, can you tell us a bit more about how far you've come in the reduction of the emissions here?
So the starting point is our North Star, which is our net zero goal. So we are committed to halving emissions by 2030 compared to our baseline year FY16. And then we have set different goals for different parts of our value chain. Overall, we have committed to 50% reduction. Some parts like manufacturing, we have committed to 80% reduction. Some parts
what would that be, the 80% area?
80% reduction in manufacturing.
Manufacturing, okay.
Yeah. And then we have 50% reduction, for example, in materials as such. So since FY16, we have made steady progress. As of FY23, we had reduced our emissions by 22% compared to our baseline year. Some parts of the value chain, we have made more impact than the others, like product use at home, which is our second biggest footprint. There we have almost halved emissions.
That's thanks to the LED lamps, right?
Exactly. And in production and product transport, for example, we have reduced close to 30% emissions compared to our baseline. But then there are other parts where we continue working hard to find solutions, like, for example, in materials, where we have achieved 7% reduction, but we have a long way to go. And it's not much time left between now and 2030.
It's difficult, but thank you. So Maria, in terms of value chains, what can you tell us about Stegra's work in reducing emissions?
Yeah, so in order to actually get the steel plant in place, we needed 6.5 billion, which we now have raised. But in order to do
Are you
that...
speaking, just to clarify,
Euros.
Euros, yes, not dollars,
No,
euros.
euros. And in order to do that, we really needed to have a very robust financial scheme, which based on one of the key components were our take-or-pay contracts with the customers. So normally in steelmaking, you are signing contracts for a year at a time. These are 5 to 7 years, which are take or pay, so the customer pay whether they want it or not. And it is a green premium of 30% that we're now reaching, even above 30% in the contracts that we're now signing. And that was really key in order to get the financing in place. The other key point, which is also related to the value chain, is really to have multiple partners in the first sets of rounds of financing that we have had. So we have had both raw material producers investing in us, we have had technical suppliers investing in us, and customers.
And of course, this has implications on, for instance, companies that you work with that produce cars in terms of reducing their emissions and their value chain too. So it's
absolutely. So once the car fleet has been electrified, then the major CO2 that is still in the car is coming from the steel. So it has a huge impact on the automotive industry to actually get the material out there.
Thank you very much. Turning to you now again, Fiona, in terms of the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions, how do they sort of interconnect with what we're talking about here, the value chains of the corporations?
So the NDCs are absolutely vital. Somebody described them as one of the most important policy documents that could be written this century. So that's a very big deal. And I hope that quote is ringing in everybody's ears this week, because it's essential for us to support the strongest ambition possible when it comes to the NDCs. Every corporation knows that they can only go so far on their own. They need to create a level playing field. They need to work with others. They need to collaborate. And we think of this in extremely detailed terms, actually. We're having conversations saying this is what a good and effective NDC looks like for the world, and also aligned with that, this is what a good and effective NDC looks like for Unilever. Now, every country will have a different NDC, of course. Everybody has their own challenges and opportunities, but what we would like to see is that every country strives for the highest ambition. So that means keeping to 1.5 degrees, it means phasing out fossil fuels. It also means as well, from very practical terms, businesses need certainty and surety. So they want to know the timeline. When will the NDC be implemented? What will the policy framework look like to give us the opportunities to decarbonise? Will it be integrated with the NBSAPs? Will it work to scale up regen ag? What exactly will that look like? And also, we're very aware that corporates need to play their part as well. You know, one of our asks is in every jurisdiction that's covered by an NDC, which is pretty much every country, that there's climate transition action plans that are 1.5 aligned and are verified, and you can track them to the NDC. So it's an incredibly important policy document, but we don't want them just to be policy documents. We want them to be 5-year investment plans. We want them to be something real. So yes, you can see I'm getting excited about it, because there is a lot of opportunity there, and it has some real potential if we crack it, if we get it done right.
So it sounds like you were able to put some pressure here on this entire work with the NDCs. Was that correct?
I would say it's more to show that we have skin in the game. We think this is really important. And it's important because there's various policymakers who are currently holding the pen on the NDCs. They're trying to work on it at the moment. And it's up to businesses and civil society to give the confidence and cover the governments need to go harder and stronger on their NDCs, because it's not always straightforward. And that is why we have a role to play to say it's really important for us. It's very important for our climate transition action plan. They need to be aligned, and we need to work together on it.
Could you elaborate a bit on how corporations can really play in, and what advice, you named a few things here, into this process, and how this could be done?
I'll give you a couple of examples, actually. So, number one, Unilever has written a report with Patricia Espinosa showing what a good and effective NDC looks like. Number two, we are demonstrating where our actions will align with an NDC, where it comes from our actions and investments. Number three, we're talking to our trade associations, industry bodies. We're saying we want to make sure that the policies that we are talking about are also the policies you're talking about. They need to be 1.5 aligned. And also, governments also welcome that dialogue between businesses and corporations and governments. And we're there to say, we are there to support that, we will help that. So there's many, many things that we can do to support a good and strong NDC.
Excuse me. So would you like to add? Johan, I mean, I didn't address you so far, but I will. But anyone, would you like to add, or Maria, would you like to add anything?
I think it's an excellent example. It's so incredibly important that companies can showcase that it's possible to transform the value chains and the results achieved and the opportunities, because that really sends a signal to the governments, both that they can raise their NDCs, but actually also that it's time to integrate the clean transformation as part of the GDP, they complete the plan, because it's really a question who will take this opportunity in terms of the clean solutions, basically, which countries, which regions, which cities. So I do believe it's two parts, raising the NDCs, but then actually getting the countries to completely integrate this in their overall plan and see it as an opportunity. So they go really in tandem, as far as I see it.
Sri, would you like to add? Thank you, Johan.
Couldn't agree more with Fiona and Johan. I just wanted to add one point, that when governments are working on NDCs, it's not only about climate mitigation, just emissions reduction, but also about having an integrated approach to nature, about taking care of health, about inequities, securing a just transition. All of these need to flow into, they need to be elements of an effective and ambitious NDC 3.0.
And that, of course, relates to all of your work in your companies, what you just mentioned, right? Thank you, Sri. So, Maria, would you like to give your perspective?
I think that we just, and it has been said already, we need to be very ambitious in these efforts. And it is truly also global, the whole transition that we are making. Like if we look at H2 Green Steel, it has been possible due to some policies that we have in Europe. And I think that we need to get to that also globally in order to make the transition.
Thank you. So what are your hopes now for the NDCs? Sri, I mean, if you really sort of wish for the improvements that might happen now?
Just repeating myself here, we really need the NDCs to be as ambitious as possible, aligned to the science of 1.5. I think, Fiona, you mentioned about it, transition plans act as an excellent demand signal to the governments that we have a skin in the game. And it will enable this virtuous cycle of private sector coming in, stepping in, clearly demonstrating the intent. And then and that should hopefully lend confidence to the government to also make their NDCs more ambitious. And not only ambitious, but also trickling down into proper policies and legislations, which can then also see implementation and investments from the government in the coming five years as such. And that will set this virtuous cycle as such, companies contributing to national targets as such.
Fiona, anything else? I mean, it could be quite specific here because we have a very informed audience.
Sure. Well, for us, there's a couple of things we'd like to see. So I talked about the broad points I'd like to see in many NDCs, but for us, it's important to see how could a government scale up regen ag in country. So we'd love to see that mentioned. For us as well, it's very important to see, okay, well, we want to make sure that everything we use is from renewable energy. What are your plans on that? What does that look like, for example, for biomethane? What does that look like for solar, for wind? We'd like to see that. Also as well, it's a topic that isn't really discussed all that much, but it's about chemicals. So how can we decarbonize the chemicals that we use in our home care? It's a topic that people don't really speak that much about, but I'd like to see it on the agenda more, so I'd like to see that in the NDCs.
That's the ingredients, but also how the ingredients are
both actually,
produced.
You're right,
yeah,
absolutely. It's the same. What's the energy they use to manufacture, but also what's the actual inputs as well. And then as well, and I'm glad, Sri, that you actually mentioned this, they have to be integrated with nature. They have to be integrated with the national biodiversity plans. That's absolutely essential. But also, I'm making very high demands here. I'm saying this is stuff that we'd love to see. but we also have to play our part, because we might come away from these conversations and they might be the most beautifully produced policy documents in the world, but if they're just policy documents and they don't translate into money and plans and implementation, they'll just remain beautiful policy documents dusty on a shelf somewhere. So my hope is that they become real and they become tangible, but that's not going to be that easy unless we all pull in together on it.
And you're putting pressure on all these companies that are represented here, of course. Thank you, Fiona. So Maria, any specific details you'd like to get in place?
I would love to see that we start to enable, in more places than just Europe, a CO2 price. Like the CBAM, for example, is really the real reason why
climate
H2GS...
border mechanisms in Europe.
Yeah,
Yes, just to
absolutely.
clarify,
I mean, it was the fear of the CBAM that started the automotive industry to approach us and ask us for green steel, because we're going to be able to produce green steel at the same price of brown once the CBAM is actually in place. And getting more of that globally, I believe, will really make this transition go faster. The other thing is already mentioned here as well, but we need to really start to put in a lot of efforts in our grids globally, in particular on the places where there is a lot of renewable electricity, continuous flow of for example, hydropower that allows these type of productions. But the grid is key, and the states needs to help in order to enable it.
Go ahead, Sri.
Since we are talking about wish list, one thing which I forgot to mention is about circular infrastructure as well. For us at IKEA, materials is almost 46% of our overall emissions.
That's a lot.
And we are aiming to transition towards renewable and recycled materials by 2030. And for that, we need massive amount of recycled materials. And today we see that it's a big bottleneck in Europe as well as all parts of the world. And there is a great possibility here to convert waste to resource and to bring that back into the circularity loop as such. So we would greatly benefit as a business if there is heavy focus
Maybe
on
somebody's
circular.
listening here. Plastic, wood, steel, aluminum, everything that goes into your products.
Yeah.
More circular materials. Thank you, Sri. So any blocker that you would like to shine light on here that needs to be eliminated or, well, refined or altered? Johan?
Well, the key point, but we already talked about it, is the relative pricing between fossil and the new climate solutions, where we heavily subsidize the fossil solutions. So that is such a tremendous blocker. So whatever can be done there will have an enormous effect. So that's one thing, of course. But we have to work within the limits we have in any case, as far as I see it. As you mentioned, Sri, I think the material transformation has partly been ignored. Of course, we see that renewable energy is scaling, even if there are a lot of blockers there in terms of permits in particular, I would say, and also some regulations in regards to the distributed energy system, which I'm convinced has a tremendous potential, which means basically invest in renewable energy really at the edge of the network and storage, etc., to partly not being dependent on the grids. But then also to highlight regen agriculture and sustainable forestry, we need incentives for the people, for the landowners and for the farmers, positive incentives for the smaller companies and so on, so it's not perceived as another burden that you start to put on these smaller actors. There needs to be really positive incentives. And I do think that a lot of these people like to be planetary stewards, as far as I see it. But there has to be an economy in it, yes.
Thank you. Anybody else? Blockers? Maria?
I think one thing that we don't raise too often is the lack of talent, actually, in particular on the engineering side. We need to get more and more kids to get really excited about engineering, because there is a lot to actually be able to have impact in this global transition if you choose that route, and there is a lack of it today. Another thing that I do think we really need to start to work even more on is we enabled it through partnerships. across the value chain. Let's now also talk about partnerships between countries, because this is a question about where the cheap electrons are, for example. And in some cases, you might need to stop doing the way that we have done it for 100 years and actually start to divide up that value chain a little bit more. For example, just to make it simple in steel making requires iron. And today, iron ore is shipped into Europe, and you make the iron in continental Europe. This is where you abate the most if you go the green route, but you really need green electrons, and there isn't enough in the middle of Europe. So instead of subsidizing these huge iron-making facilities, where the OPEX is going to be really high in the future, do that somewhere else and bring in the iron instead and keep the steel making in these countries. So we need to have different type of solutions and different partnerships between countries as well in order to enable it, I believe.
How can we get that to happen? I mean, that's quite a bit of regulatory puzzle here to lay out, right?
Yes, it is. On multiple levels. I shouldn't go into it because it comes too detailed, but yeah.
Well, thank you. In terms of countries in the global south, opportunities to grow in this transition, looking at curbing emissions and looking at the value chains, what would you like to add here, Sri?
I think it's a great opportunity to reinvent the economies as such. And 2 points that, Johan, you mentioned at the outset, phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies. And today it's not about renewable energy is cheap, but they don't have a level playing field. How can governments really enable that?
That's insane still. Yeah. Subsidies, yes.
So that'll allow our supply chain to go full throttle as such. So that's one thing which comes to mind.
But how could this, I mean, we need more pressure on the decision makers, right, to get the fossil fuels subsidies off.
And NDCs, there should be a clear demonstration of complete phase out of fossil fuel. So it's not phasing away from fossil fuel, it's phase out of fossil fuels. And that language needs to come out more clearly.
Thank you. We have the non-fossil fuel proliferation treaty. It's a mouthful. That is aiming to do, of course, just that and shed light on this process. So, Fiona, global South possibilities in terms of this work.
Yes, I mean, I think it does go back to how can you drive countries to leapfrog those carbon-intensive industries? So how can you leapfrog that? And when you speak to people in the countries, and they are very clear, they say, well, what we need is money, we need financing. And there's a big opportunity coming up at COP29 for the newly collective qualified goal for that to be agreed. Because again, we talk about the NDCs, and some countries will be able to finance that on their own, and some won't. Some will need a collection of different finance mechanisms to drive those NDCs forwards. And so that is why that conversation at COP29 will be so critical. And it's important to keep pointing out, really, that it needs to be just and needs to be fair. We don't want to create a solution in 10 years' time where we've won the war on emissions, but we haven't won the war on inequality. So this is a perfect opportunity to make sure actually it's done fairly. So I have to say it's finance, and all eyes should be on COP29, and all eyes should be on the negotiators at COP29. And I'm sure the negotiators will be looking around them to say, well, who's supporting us to go further and faster on this? And that's why, again, it's people like who are on panels like this have to speak up and say, there is an issue, we understand there's an issue. There's not a lack of money, but the money is going to in the wrong direction. So how can we reroute those harmful subsidies? How can we create bankable projects? How can we make sure the cost of capital comes down? So yes, that's what I would say. I think that's one of the barriers there.
Thank you for spelling it out so clearly, Fiona. The title of this session is Race to the Top. So how could we shift the narrative from sharing the burdens, I mean that this is really tedious work, it's horribly difficult, to more of this is actually a possibility for companies and also for countries with, of course, different backgrounds and also different possibilities to do this leapfrogging, as you mentioned, Fiona. But how do we work with the narrative? I mean, at Stegra, you've been very good at using the narrative to easily explain the purpose of what you're doing. So any pointers?
Yeah, I think this is part of the reason also actually that we changed our name from H2 Green Steel to Stegra, is because we would like to do more than maybe just steel and enable maybe the steel industry to actually make the transformation like doing iron, and we also do the hydrogen. But these two components require places where you have a lot of green electrons at a cheap cost. And if we talk about then the South, there is tremendous opportunities in many of these countries to actually have this green transition and enable Europe and United States to actually make the green transition in a more sustainable way. But then we shouldn't just make hydrogen in these countries, we should actually make something that is value add, so the value stays in the country before we ship it out. I think that's one thing that is really important. The other thing that is really important is that many of these countries will need help with building out the grid. So there's going to need to be a lot of investments that we jointly need to do together. So it is going back a little bit to my comment before, that I think countries even need to come together, and investor needs to come together in order to race to the top.
Thank you, Maria. Fiona, narrative. What is your take on shifting this?
I think it's crucial that we demonstrate how far we've come. And I think your presentation, actually, Johan, was very good to show that. You know, we are going in the right direction, but maybe not as fast as we possibly need. And I think it's incredibly important that we hold the line and we say we can't compromise too much about this. You know, we are heading towards a very difficult situation if temperatures continue to rise, and we shouldn't sugarcoat that. It will be horrific, it really will be. However, there is still time to fix it. And we have the solutions, we have the science, we know how to do it, but what we're lacking at certain places is perhaps the bravery and the ambition. So it's very important that whenever we have any conversations like this, we step up and we say, it's possible, we know it's possible, I'm going to show you my skin in the game, this is what we're doing, can you now show me what you're going to do? Because we will get there. But we need to get there, and we need to get there fast. So the narrative and keeping that hope is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. And how do we deliver this narrative leading up now to COP29, Fiona?
I think it's in situations like this, in New York at the moment, at Climate Week, a lot of the narratives are actually kind of up for grabs. There's people pushing different things. And it's up to progressive business to say, we know it's possible, this is what we are doing, and these are the case studies, we can show you what we're actually doing as well. And it's important that we start drowning out maybe those other voices that aren't so helpful, you know, and it's important that any type of influencing moment that you have, you use your voice at it. You know, for example, we published a climate policy engagement review where we said, this is what we want our trade associates to talk about on our behalf. Others are also doing it. There's many, many ways that we can win the battle. We just need to keep doing it.
Thank you, Fiona. So we're coming to, well, Sriram, maybe you want to add to something before we conclude.
Just one point. I would also add the narrative on economic relevance and economic resilience of countries, because the supply chains of today might look quite different from the supply chains 10 years from now.
True that.
And we are already seeing, and I would also borrow Fiona's messaging on the need for bravery and ambition. Financing is very much key to this whole discussion, but countries need to demonstrate the bravery and the ambition that we see this as an economic opportunity to make the transition. We are already seeing this discussion. Should we just move this sourcing of this product from commodity from this market to this market? Because preconditions are quite better here. So it's for economies, it's to realize that they can protect their economic base, they can preserve their economic base, but also grow exponentially on that economic base.
Thank you, Sri. I'd like to ask Johan to share a few words of conclusion, also maybe a call to action here from the exponential perspective here on Race to the Top, please.
I think we, as sort of representing the business community, what can we do? That is key. And just to echo what you said, Fiona, as well, is basically we need to show that the transformation is happening. It is possible. We've achieved enormous results. It's not any longer about sort of setting targets. Well, it's important that we get the broader base of companies setting targets, but we reached quite a big base in terms of the global economy. Something like 90% has some kind of net zero target. So that's a great achievement. But what is really important now is to show that it is possible, it is happening. We are transforming these value chains. We can show that to all our peer companies, that the new holy grail is about transforming value chains. If you're not doing that, you're not part of the game in 5 years' time. Every company needs to understand that. And then you have to work in a completely new way. You can achieve tremendous results. And then at the same time, work with our trade associations. Thanks for your excellent work there. Put pressure on your trade organizations. Ensure that they align with 1.5. You have to step in there or step out. That's a key point. And we have to have a much stronger voice in terms of policy, but also work to integrate now the clean transformation as part of the GDP as well, complementing the NDCs, getting it into the mainstream of all economies.
Well, thank you very much, Johan Falk, Exponential Roadmap Initiative co-founder and CEO, and of course, Sriram Rajagopal from Inter IKEA Group, and Fiona Duggan also from Unilever, and Maria Persson Gulda from Stegra, for sharing your insights in this panel. And keep the pressure on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.